More than $2 million have already poured into the San Diego mayor's race. Our Follow the Money reporter will give us the latest on where it's coming from. The California Coastal Commission last night approved the ambitious plan to expand the San Diego Convention Center. And a new breed of creative architects are building support for smaller, denser development. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. I'm Alison St. John, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Andrew Keats of the San Diego Daily Transcript, Tony Perry of the Los Angeles Times, and Joe Girardi of iNewsSource, a KPBS investigative partner. So, Joe, we know that you've been up late last night looking at the latest on the money from the mayor's race. Last night was the deadline for campaigns and committees to declare how much they've raised so far in the race for mayor. And the grand total for the top four candidates is more than $2 million. Though we're still weeks away from the just the primary. So tell us, why is this deadline so important for understanding the money in the mayor's race?
That's a great question. The reason is, up until now, we've seen a portion of the campaign's fundraising and expenditures. Only donors who gave over $1,000 had to be reported. Yesterday, we got the first full picture of every single dollar raised and spent by the mayoral campaigns and, crucially, by independent political committees that are supporting them.
Okay, so let's first of all remind the listeners who all the candidates are. We have Nathan Fletcher, David Alvarez, Kevin Faulkner, and Mike Aguirre. So tell us a little bit, give us a thumbnail of how, in fact, they came out. Who got the most money?
Sure. In terms of top dollar amount of contributions, David Alvarez and the committee supporting him raised the most money. They raised over $1 million. After him, you've got Nathan Fletcher and the committee supporting him. They had almost $800,000. Then Councilman Kevin Faulkner and his committee got a little over $600,000. And then way trailing far behind is former city attorney Mike Aguirre. He only raised a little over $3,000.
And I think what's interesting about this is the disparity between the special interests and the smaller donors. Give us a bit of a breakdown of who got the most individual donors.
Sure. Now, in terms of individual donors, campaigns are only required to list donors who gave at least $100. Now, that still accounts for over 95% of all the campaign's fundraising, but it's still not a 100% tally, but it's pretty close. And the candidate who got the most was Kevin Faulkner. He raised his money from almost 1,100 unique donors. After him, Nathan Fletcher got it from about 1,000 donors. David Alvarez is way back. He had about 280 donors, and Mike Aguirre had 17 donors.
Okay, and he himself contributed quite a bit to his own campaign.
That's right. Mike cut himself a $1,500 check.
Okay, and just before we sort of leave the numbers here, the big special interests, the PACs, as it were, how much did the PACs give? Are they pretty dominant in each race?
Yes, very dominant in the mayor's race. And the reason is these independent committees, they're prohibited from coordinating with candidates' campaigns, but they are specifically established to support those candidacies. And unlike campaigns where there are strict limits on the amount of money they can raise, these independent committees can raise unlimited amounts of money from businesses, individuals, unions, almost any group or entity you can imagine. So they're very powerful. And they've been very powerful in this race. David Alvarez, in particular, has been a major beneficiary of them. The San Diego and Imperial Counties Labor Council, which endorsed him, established an independent committee back in early September to support him, and they've raised almost $900,000. That's over 6 times as much money as the Alvarez campaign itself has raised.
So, Tony, you know, it looks like the limits have been raised this time. There's more money pouring in than ever before. I know that you have said that perhaps money is not the deciding factor in the mayor's race, but how important do you think it is?
Well, we've seen a number of rich candidates or well-funded candidates lose, so it is not a determinative factor. What I find interesting here, clearly Alvarez, he's the labor union's man. Clearly, Faulkner, he's the business community's man. Mike Aguirre is his own man. And the one that interests me is Fletcher, the former Republican independent Democrat. Whose man is he? What do we know about this Nathan Fletcher from looking at his contributions?
It's interesting. You nailed it. David Alvarez, very reliant on the labor unions. Kevin Faulconer, very reliant on business people and business interests. But Nathan Fletcher, if you look at the types of people who are supporting him, it's really a mix of several different groups. He's gotten some union endorsements, and he's gotten some union money as well. He's also gotten plenty of money from various small business owners. One group in particular that might not be a surprise, as a lot of people know, Nathan Fletcher is a former Qualcomm employee. He has gotten a lot of donations from Qualcomm employees, including the Jacobs, who gave over $60,000 to an independent committee supporting him.
So while we're all laughing at, not all, but while Fletcher's getting laughed at for this evolving political view he seems to have from Republican to independent Democrat, and certainly the Union Tribune editorial page is running a campaign against him, and Tony Kovarik from the Republican Party is running a Twitter campaign against him. What you're saying, it would seem to me, suggests that, hey, what we think is funny and a weakness may be a strength, that he's been all over the place and everybody can see something in him they like, business, labor, whoever.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really important to differentiate this race is it's got such a short timeline, right? And so when it's got such a short timeline, not only is that important on its own, it's also important for Faulconer and Alvarez, who've never run for citywide office. And, just the nature of being a city councilman is you're not really very well known outside your district. So they need to introduce themselves to everybody. And the only way to do that is with a lot of money. So while it's true that, we've seen well-funded candidates lose races in the past. In fact, just a year ago, Nathan Fletcher and Carl DeMaio had far more money than Bob Filner and still lost. But the different thing here is that no one knows who Kevin Faulconer is. No one knows who David Alvarez is, and their polling shows that. Their name recognition is awful. Nathan Fletcher, people know him. Mike Aguirre, as little money as he's raised, he's won a citywide election before. Only one of the 4 guys in the race who's ever done that. So if you're going to go out and introduce yourself, you can't shake every hand in the city. So you need TV, you need mailers. Those things cost money.
I'm not sure it's a short campaign. Campaigns, people really only plug in the last few weeks. We're interested from day one, but real people who are running their elevators every day, only in the last few weeks. So I'm not sure.
That's an
the
interesting
Brits
point.
like these short campaigns.
Exactly.
Sure.
I was going to say.
Do it and get it over with. Now,
it works
it's
just
going
as
to lengthen
well.
out if we go to a runoff. You're going to have half of November, all of December, maybe all of January. So before one of these folks emerges and takes over that seat at 202 C Street, we're going to be at this a while.
Yeah, I think he's right. I think this is a good example of the fact that the campaigns we normally think about are way too long. People spend too much time doing it, and no one's really paying attention. But the way that normally plays out is every couple weeks somebody releases a plan. Here's my economic platform. Here's my platform to help the environment, or to improve water quality, or to adjust water rates, or to do all these sorts of things. And then in the last month of the race, when everybody does tune in, you can point to your resume and you can say, look, I've collected all these endorsements, I've put out all these reports, I've done all these things. And normally it happens over the course of a year. There's just no time for any of that right now.
Okay, well, we haven't got to the fact that, in fact, possibly voter turnout might have more impact on this race than anything about the money. But good. Thank you so much for filling us in, Joe. Just a reminder to our audience, KPBS will host a mayoral debate with the top 4 candidates in the race this coming Monday, live on KPBS Radio at noon and on KPBS television at 5 p.m. So be sure and tune in for that. And now, from the campaign for a new mayor for San Diego to the campaign to win approval of the convention center expansion in downtown. At more than $500 million, that's the estimate, the expansion of the downtown convention center is one of the most important developments in the region. And last night, the California Coastal Commission voted to approve the plan, in spite of objections from their staff. So, Tony Perry, you've been covering this. Why do you think the Commission decided to vote for it, in spite of the reservations their staff had?
Well, the Coastal Commission...
And tell us what the reservations were.
Well, the Coastal Commission Act says basically you ought to do 2 things. You ought to protect people's access to the coast and their view corridors, but you also ought to help economic development and allow people to build on the coast. 2 contradictory sorts of ideas. Now, the staff has always leaned towards let's protect the coastline and access. They were against the original convention center. They were against the Midway. And the commission, different members, but the commission overrode them. Commission members all had concerns, all bowed to the staff a little bit and said, yeah, it does block some views, and yeah, it does build out real close to the water, and yeah, it really is kind of boxy. But I thought County Supervisor Greg Cox, who's a member of the Coastal Commission, I thought did it best. He said, when we want to start worrying about having a waterfront with open vistas, that ship sailed long time ago. I mean, we got hotels, we got the original convention center, we have all sorts of things. So in the end, they went with that. Although I thought it was wonderful because I thought we were getting in that long debate yesterday, what we're not getting in the mayor's race, frankly, which is really different views on how San Diego should proceed. I mean, we had the labor union and the business folks saying, build, 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 we got to have it. And then we had the environmentalists and some attorneys saying, let's not build. We're walling off this wonderful thing called our bayfront.
Well, so Tony, you're talking about the fact, I think that's absolutely right, that the building is there. There was only a small amount of space with a view to the bay, but they did have a good design element to it. And they describe how the expansion would, in fact, perhaps provide more views of the bay.
Well, it would go from the existing center towards the water. So it really wouldn't block your view if you were out on the street. But it would allow the Hilton to build right next to the current Hilton. Now, that would block the view, largely speaking, from that wonderful new library that we have. And the commission wrestled with that. Then, of course, you had the whole Chargers issue. And the Chargers, they had submitted documents saying, reject this. We have a better idea. Off of the coastline, back a few blocks, down a few blocks, and let's build a convention center / stadium.
Well, it's interesting because your article sort of said it was a bit of a catch-22 for the city because we had to go with the expansion to keep Comic-Con. But if we go with this expansion, do we lose the Chargers?
Well, yeah, it was Comic-Con versus Chargers. In some way, that's how I teed it up. And they went with Comic-Con. Todd Gloria, the acting mayor, says we can have both. We're a world-class city, although I guess the rejoinder to that is if you're a world-class city, you don't have to keep saying that. New York doesn't say that. They know they're world-class. But he says world-class cities have pro football. We're going to save the Chargers. Okay, good luck. Jerry Sanders tried and couldn't. We'll see what you can get done. So we'll see. We'll see. But it did tee up economically, and the numbers were pretty astounding if they pan out. 7,000 new jobs, 3,000 construction jobs, $700 million in additional spending in the city a year, $13.5 million in tax revenue. This is if they expand, keep the beloved Comic-Con, but also get even bigger conventions or more lucrative conventions. Read the doctors, get them to come. And so the numbers were such against the aesthetics, which were that, yeah, but you're giving away the view and access.
So the numbers for the benefits were pretty enormous, but then again, some people say that the costs actually to the public might be bigger than is actually being estimated.
Indeed,
Andrew.
And there's some talk that this 5-acre park on the roof is not going to attract people. Then there was talk about, well, how about a better bridge, another bridge? Mm-hmm. Port District said, yeah, well, that's $42 million that we can't afford. And don't forget, this is all in court. Right. This is all in court. This is San Diego, so we litigate everything we can. Certainly, remember, Petco Park was litigated. Expansion of Qualcomm Stadium was litigated. Well, this thing is being litigated the way they're teeing it up as financed mostly by a surcharge that the hoteliers approved to slap on to mom and dad when they come and stay in the Hilton.
Andrew?
Yeah.
So you've covered development a lot. I mean, this is one of these choices, isn't it, about whether you invest in these big downtown projects or neighborhoods. I mean, do you feel like this is, from your analysis, a good investment?
I think they created a relatively novel design concept with this large park on the roof of the building. And I think that there's an interesting question about whether anybody from the city or anybody from outside the immediate area right surrounding the convention center is ever going to use that thing. I mean, I live in Golden Hill. It's about 20 blocks away.
Yeah, it's like going to somebody else's backyard for your picnic. If you had pressed me, I didn't know you could go over that bridge and play around.
Yeah, the idea that anybody is going to drive down to the convention center and park their car at a paid lot so that they can walk up 4 flights of stairs to be at a park that's going to be filled with conventioners wearing little placards, it's just silly. It's not going to happen.
Or the Comic-Con people in their costumes. That'll scare you away
yeah.
right there.
No, that said, it is pretty. And, the alternative seems to be just a roof that literally no one will be there for. But the argument that it is a good replacement for having readily available coastal access strikes me as absurd on its face.
Well, Joe, I mean, have you had a look at the plans? It does look pretty attractive with this green grass on the top. I mean, if you are a San Diegan downtown, would you take your visiting relatives perhaps to the roof of the convention center to look at the bay? I mean,
just think about what you just said. It's crazy. The roof of the convention center.
I don't know if it's necessarily so crazy if I live downtown, and I guess this kind of gets to the question then. We hear this in the campaign too now for mayor. Everyone talking about, well, downtown versus the neighborhoods. And this seems to be one of those issues again. Is this just something that people downtown are viewing as more sort of the politicians paying attention to downtown at expense of the neighborhoods?
Yeah, downtown is becoming the new punching bag. It used to be developers when growth was the issue. Well, the recession stopped growth pretty well. So now we're punching downtown. Don't forget the financing supposedly is going to be this surcharge. So that when you come and check into a downtown hotel, the hoteliers voted to slap on a surcharge. Being challenged in court, won the first round, could lose the additional rounds. So it isn't a lot as it is teed up, isn't a lot of general fund money that could otherwise build something in North Park or Tierra Sada.
And it's not just a surcharge on downtown hotel stays. It's a surcharge on a sliding scale throughout the entire city. So
1 to 3.
Yeah, 1 to 3%. So if you
Can
stay
you explain that?
Yeah, so basically what they did, they
Penny on a dollar.
Yeah, it depends on how far you are. They basically put concentric circles emanating from the convention center, and the one closest to it has a 3% charge that goes into paying for this fund, and then the next circle has a 2% charge, and the next circle a 1% charge. So that means even if you're staying in San Isidro at the border in a little motel, 1% of that stay is presumably because your stay there had something to do with the convention center.
And in
the
fact, Tony,
the reason it was fashioned like this is the hoteliers, Papa Doug Manchester among them, are politically powerful in this city, and to have gone to the public and asked them to slap some additional money onto the transient occupancy test
because they were not willing to
could
really
have
do it
gotten the
with a general
opposition
fund.
from the powerful hoteliers, because my goodness, we're not going to get the direct benefit. So they went to the hoteliers and said, direct benefit for you.
But Tony,
well, if you're an outlier, a little less.
Is this actually quite possibly going to take years to litigate? So
well, that's
we don't
what the
know
chargers
if that money
said.
is
That's
available.
what Mark Fabiani, the Chargers spokesman, said. You're going to fuss around in court for years while the potential of the Chargers plan withers and dies, and financial realities being what they are, the moving vans may have to arrive, and away they go to some place dreadful like Los Angeles, potentially.
Well, let's leave this mega project and move to something a little more manageable and turn our attention to the kind of new developments that will have a much more direct effect on most of our lives, the kind of development that we see filling an empty block somewhere in the neighborhood, perhaps, with trendy condos built with sandwich shops right underneath. This is what's known as infill development. And Andy, you've written about an interesting new group of architects who are sort of changing the paradigm of developments, because I think there's a certain amount of negativity in San Diego about denser development. What are these architects doing?
Tony just said it. The proverbial whipping boy in San Diego is always the developers. There's this faceless group that we don't like that is the developers who bring bad things to our neighborhood. And what these folks are doing, there's maybe a dozen of them out there. They're architect developers, so they're designing their own projects and they're developing their own projects, which normally architects are kind of just contracted employees to come do some drawings for somebody's plan. And so what it means is that they can do these sorts of projects that are specifically tailored to the neighborhood that they want to go into, and crucially on very small lots. So they can find some very little lot and they can say, we need to build a lot of units in San Diego to decrease the cost of housing, but we don't need to do that everywhere. So if we can find this small little lot and build, 24 units here, that's fine. We can do it. And they develop in such a way that they basically find the most that they can build on a lot based on the zoning without having to trigger a review process that's going to bring them before the planning commission or the city council or the community planning groups, so that they just build there. They find that threshold and they just say, okay, let's
We hear so many fights about people trying to change the general plan and the developers just pushing it a little bit further, Sun Road being a prime example. And now you're saying it is possible to do these infill developments without pushing those limits.
Yeah, and, I don't want to lionize them too much. They have their own complaints with development services and with the city and with whether the code is good as it's defined. But they basically say it just costs time and money to get in these fights. So even if we think that there should be more here, even if we would like to build more here, it's worth it for us not to. So they just say, fine, you want 24 units? 24 units you got. I'm going to save the 6 months to 12 months fighting for it, and I'm going to move on to my next project and do another 24 units.
Doesn't this fly in the face of something that was once considered a San Diego achievement? The community planning groups and their involvement and their power, such as it seems like what we're talking here is a way around those folks and how to keep it out of politics and just kind of grease the skids.
Well, so there are certainly some people in the community planning process who would see it that way. The natural rebuttal, of course, is it's the community planning groups who came up with these thresholds in the first place. They're in the community planning process and in the zoning process, they decided, well, we want 24 units here, and if somebody builds 24 units, then they can just build and go away. So their perspective is the community planning group is the one who decided what's going to go here. We're just giving them what they said that they wanted. Why should we listen to them about?
If I live across the street from one of these and I don't like it, other than writing a flaming letter to the editor, can I appeal to the Planning Commission, to the City Council?
Nope. It's by right development. They've already got the right to do it.
This is where the rubber meets the road. And in fact, you write in the article that it all comes down to parking, whether you can provide enough parking for the people in the building so that the neighbors don't complain, since that seems to be often people's problem with these developments.
Well, and so the city zoning basically builds in all kinds of different ways what the parking requirements are per either square foot of office space or square foot of retail space or a number of housing units you come up with. And so what one of the developers says in my piece is he says, if you imagine a curve, you're going up and your profitability is on one side and your number of units on the other. You reach a point where you can maximize your profitability while complying with the parking regulations, but then at a certain point, you need to build a parking garage. And once you need to build a parking garage, then you need to build 30 more units to get profitable again. So you just find that area right underneath where you need to build a parking garage, and then you just build that many units.
I think it's really interesting because right here on our panel, we have sort of two different generations, and we have Tony, who is, a bit perhaps loath to see these denser developments going up across the road. Well, correct me.
Absolutely.
You asked. And aspires to, a large house with a 3-acre garden and sort of ranch house style living.
We've been through this before in San Diego, and it started a revolution that ended up with planning groups. That is to say, let's build things, small things. Let's not worry about parking. Let's just get a lot of units in and keep everything right below the radar. And it started a revolution that ended up with Pete Wilson as mayor and such things, and the community planning group. So we're kind of recycling back in some ways. Now, maybe this new generation of developer architects are more public-spirited.
So, Andrew, explain why it is that, in fact, we're in a different environment from even 10 years ago, and the land is shrinking, so developers have different options.
Right. Basically, we're lane constrained in San Diego. You hear it all the time. We've got Pendleton to the north, Mexico to the south, the ocean to the west, and then eventually you get to the desert. So short of creating new land, we've basically developed to the extent of our ability to develop. The greenfield development, as they call, where you just plow an area and start putting up housing units, has mostly happened already. So but that doesn't mean that the population has stopped growing alongside it. So in order to accommodate that population, there's really no choice but to develop in denser ways.
And I wanted to ask Joe, as perhaps representing the upcoming generation here, how does that appeal to you? The idea of an urban core development like Andy's describing, where you can walk to the store in 5 minutes and the cinema in 10 minutes, and you don't have a lot of space. Does that seem like not the future that you would foresee for yourself? How do you see the difference between the urban living and the sort of suburban living?
Do you live in a tent now?
Yeah,
give us a sense of how you live.
We live in that park above the convention center.
But this is the sort of choice that we're facing as San Diegans as these urban projects develop. How do you feel about them?
Hey, I mean, the fact is rents are high enough as they are. I mean, I can never even think about buying a home here. Prices that they are right now. I think the more housing stock that's available and is being built, the better. And if it is in a location with restaurants, with community attractions, places where people want to hang out and near where people work, I mean, I think I'd certainly be attracted to it.
However, Tony's concerns, I think, are very well understood because of the lack of public transit. I mean, that's sort of it's parking, public transit. Is
Sure,
where the
you
rub
built some
rub
of these
comes.
neighborhoods, and then you have a level of services to provide for them, parks, community centers, transportation, etc., at one level. And then you make them denser, and you move more people in. Now, this happens in planned units, too. Take Rancho Bernardo. People moved in, and then a lot more people moved in, and it got a lot more crowded, and people went, hey, it's really crowded around here. It wasn't when I moved in. Well, yeah, I think you could see that if this trend continues, people who moved into a certain area, either buying or renting, thinking things were of a certain way, and then boom, more people than they banked on
Very
are
quickly,
there
Andrew.
standing in line at the Safeway.
I do just want to reiterate that they're developing to the standard that were established in the community plans that were adopted by the community planning groups.
Good, good reminder. Right, good. So thank you so much. And this is a trend that no doubt we'll see unfolding. Good to know there are some creative architects making it a little bit more popular. That wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. Thank you to Joe Girardi of iNewsSource, Andrew Keats from Voice of San Diego, and Tony Perry of the Los Angeles Times for joining us. And a reminder that all of the stories that we discussed today are available on our kpbs.org website. I'm Alison St. John. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.